The stars were quiet, yet everyone could feel the storm that was coming. It was not a storm of wind or rain. It was something greater, something that reached across the endless sky. The galaxy had spoken of it for centuries, and now it was here, moving like a dark tide that bent light and broke the balance of space itself. Many civilizations had already run. Their fleets sailed far away, searching for safer skies. Entire planets were left behind, silent and empty, because their people no longer believed they could hold the line. In the middle of this retreat, humans did something different. They came forward. Their ships were not the grandest. Their tools were not the most advanced. But their spirit was steady. Where other species saw only fear, humans saw a chance to build. And so they arrived at a small planet that circled a dim sun, a world that was fragile, with thin clouds and quiet seas. It had no strong defenses, no mighty shields, no great value. To many, it was nothing but a forgotten rock. To humans, it became the center of their plan. The first ships entered orbit with care. They carried supplies, machines, and thousands of hands ready to work. From space, the planet looked like a pale stone drifting in shadow. It was not beautiful at first glance, but to the humans it looked like a promise. If they could protect this place, they could prove that even the weakest ground could become a home against chaos. Commander Ryan stood at the viewing deck of the lead ship. His uniform was simple, without heavy decoration, yet his eyes were full of calm determination. Around him, the crew whispered about the storm. They spoke of broken stars and wandering waves of energy that bent entire fleets. Yet Ryan's voice carried peace when he said, "We will not run. We will build." Beside him, a young officer named Lena looked at the world below. She was new to space service, her hands still unsure at the controls, but her heart carried a strength she did not yet see in herself. "Why this planet, Commander?" she asked. "It looks too small, too fragile. Can walls here truly stand against the storm?" Ryan did not turn away from the glass. He kept his eyes on the dim glow of the planet as if it were an answer. Because strength is not always in the size of stone. Sometimes strength is in the will of those who choose to hold it. "We came to show that walls are not just metal and shield. They are hope made solid." The words spread among the crew like fire in cold air. They were simple, but they carried meaning. Soon, work began. Ships released great panels that unfolded in space. Machines hummed and sparks danced as frames took shape. From every ship, workers floated into the void, wearing simple suits, carrying tools in their hands. They spoke to each other over shared channels, guiding and lifting, welding and fixing. Every day, the shelter grew. At first, it looked like scattered pieces of silver drifting near the planet. But as weeks passed, the pieces connected, forming a ring of protection. Towers rose from the frame, wide domes stretched across the beams, and generators began to pulse with light. The humans called it a shelter, not a fortress, because their aim was not only survival. They wished for a place where people could gather, live, and stand together when the storm arrived. Other species watched from afar. Their councils whispered in private meetings, their leaders shaking their heads. To them, this effort looked foolish. "Walls cannot stand against chaos," one elder said in a message that was sent across the stars. "The storm is not a battle to win, but a wave to flee." Yet the humans did not answer with anger. They only continued their work. Among the workers, there was a farmer named Tomasz. He was not trained for space, but he had left his fields behind to help. He planted the first seeds in the hydroponic sections, filling the air with green life. "If we build walls," Tomasz said with a smile, "then inside these walls we must also have bread." His words made others laugh, but his plans soon became a sign of what they were truly building, not just defense, but a home. Day by day, the shelter grew stronger. At night, when the planet's shadow covered the frame, the workers would gather in the central dome. They shared meals, sang simple songs, and told stories of their homes on Earth and the colonies. These moments filled the silence of space with warmth. It was here that fear faded, because no one felt alone. One evening, Lena sat among the group. She listened to Tomasz speak of the soil he once touched, and to Myra, an engineer, who told how her grandmother had built houses of stone by hand. Lena thought about the walls rising outside, walls made of steel, but also of voices and memories. She realized then what the commander had meant: walls are not only built by machines. They are carried in the hearts of those who refuse to let fear rule them. Still, the storm crept closer. Strange signals began to appear in the instruments. Distant lights bent in unnatural ways. The edges of the galaxy seemed to shiver like water touched by wind. Some workers paused when they saw these signs, and doubt returned to their voices. But every time fear rose, Ryan's voice would cut through. Calm, clear, steady. We build because tomorrow will need a shelter. Let the storm see that humans do not bow. At last, the first full ring of the shelter shone in the sky. It wrapped around the fragile planet like a silver crown. The people stood together in the central dome, watching the lights glow, their reflections shining in their eyes. It was not finished. Much remained to be built. But they knew that they had made a beginning that no storm could erase. The arrival was complete. Humanity had chosen its ground. While others fled, they stayed. Where others doubted, they built. Against the silence of space and the whispers of fear, the humans raised their fragile shelter, the first wall against chaos. The silver ring around the fragile planet had grown brighter. From far away, it looked like a crown made of light. From up close, it was a place of noise, sparks, voices, and endless work. Humans floated through space in their suits, carrying beams, fitting panels, checking wires, and planting life inside the domes. Every day the shelter grew, and every day the shadow of the storm drew closer. But with the growth came questions. Doubt spread like a quiet mist among the workers. It did not shout. It whispered. At first, the doubt came from beyond. Alien councils across the galaxy sent messages that reached the shelter. Some were polite, some carried warnings, and others sounded almost like pity. A council of the Orel species said, "The storm cannot be stopped. It bends light and time itself. Your shelter is a fragile toy. Leave before it breaks." Another voice came from the Kale, who lived among gas giants. They said, "We admire your courage, but courage is not enough. The storm has no enemy. It is only chaos. No wall can stand against it." The humans listened but gave no reply. They had no time for debates. Still, the words sank into minds like stones into water. Inside the shelter, Lena felt these doubts most strongly. She worked each day with steady hands, fixing circuits and guiding younger crew members, but when she returned to her quarters, the words of the aliens echoed. She lay awake, staring at the curved walls of her cabin, and thought, what if they are right? What if we are only building something that will break the moment the storm arrives? One evening she shared her worry with Tomasz, the farmer who had become a friend to many. They sat inside the hydroponic dome, where green plants grew under gentle lights. Tomasz was tending to the leaves, brushing dust from the stems. He smiled at her concern, but his eyes showed that he too had felt the same weight. "I do not know if these walls can stop a storm of stars," Tomasz admitted. "But I know that when I plant a seed, I cannot see the fruit right away. I only trust that something will grow if I care for it. Perhaps this shelter is the same. We may not know the end, but we must care for it now." His words gave Lena some peace, though the doubt did not leave her heart completely. Meanwhile, Commander Ryan faced doubt of another kind. Reports came daily from the edge of the system. Scouts spoke of strange waves moving through space, twisting signals, bending engines. Some ships had turned back early, unable to endure the strange pulls of the storm. Ryan listened to each report with calm eyes, but when he stood alone on the viewing deck, even he felt the weight of uncertainty pressing against him. One night, Myra, the engineer, came to him. She was older than most, her hair touched with silver, her hands strong from years of building. She spoke directly, without fear of his rank. "Commander, the crew is growing tired. They hear the voices of the alien councils. They hear the reports from the scouts. They wonder if we are building a shelter for nothing. You must give them more than orders. You must give them reason." Ryan turned from the stars to face her. His voice was calm but steady. "What reason did you find when you built houses of stone with your grandmother?" Myra's eyes softened. She remembered the small village where she had once lifted stones beside her grandmother, hands rough with dust, back sore from work. The walls had been simple, yet they had stood against wind and rain for many years. "We built because we needed a place to belong," she said quietly. "Then that is our reason here," Ryan answered. "The storm is vast, yes. It may break ships, it may bend light, but it cannot bend the will of people who choose to belong together. If these walls fall, let them fall with the proof that humans stood where others would not." Myra carried these words to the workers, repeating them in her own way. Soon, small fires of hope began to rise again. People told each other stories while they worked. They sang songs to pass the long hours. They shared food, even when it was simple and plain. In these moments, doubt faded, though it never disappeared fully. Yet doubt had its own strength. Some workers began to argue over design. Should the walls be thicker? Should the energy be stored in different ways? Some wanted to change plans, others wanted to stop building certain sections altogether. The debates filled the domes with tension. Lena saw one such argument between two engineers. Voices grew sharp, hands pointed at charts. She felt fear rising again, because if they could not even agree, how could they face the storm? But then Tomasz walked in carrying a basket of fresh greens. Without a word, he placed the food on the table between them. "Eat," he said simply. "You argue because you are tired. Walls are not built by tired hands." The two engineers fell silent. They ate, and the tension eased. In the end, the plans moved forward again. It was a small moment, but one that showed Lena something important. Doubt may come, but it can be softened by kindness and patience. Days turned into weeks. The shelter grew taller, wider, brighter. From the ground of the fragile planet, the ring above looked like a rising moon, a light that gave comfort. The people on the planet, who had once lived in fear, now began to send messages of thanks to the workers above. Children sang songs over the comms, their voices light and cheerful. These simple voices carried more strength than any council of elders, and they pushed back against the whisper of doubt in many hearts. Still, the storm drew nearer. Strange lights now flickered on the horizon of space, faint but clear. The instruments trembled with every passing day. The humans could see it, and the doubt returned in new form. Would the storm crush everything in a single breath? Would their fragile shelter stand for even one moment? As the workers gathered in the central dome one night, Commander Ryan stood before them. His eyes moved across the faces, tired yet bright, doubtful yet determined. He spoke with no grand speech, only steady truth. "Others may doubt us. We may doubt ourselves. But walls are not built to end storms. They are built to give shelter to those who need it. And if these walls stand even for a single day, then they will have meaning. Hold fast. Build with all your heart. That is all we are asked to do." Silence followed, then soft applause, then cheers that grew louder until the dome echoed with voices. The workers felt their spirits lift. Doubt was still there, like a shadow, but it no longer ruled them. The storm was coming, yes. The galaxy doubted, yes. But the humans kept building. And in their building, they discovered something greater. Even in the face of doubt, unity gave them strength. The storm was still far, but space had begun to change. The stars no longer looked steady. Some flickered as if hidden by invisible waves. Others bent in strange shapes, their light stretched and curved. The instruments on the shelter caught signals that had no pattern, bursts of sound that no one could explain. It was as if the universe itself was whispering warnings. Inside the shelter, life continued, but the air felt heavy. Everyone worked harder, yet everyone also glanced more often at the dark horizon where the storm was said to move. The fragile planet below was quiet, its seas calm, its clouds soft. But above, in orbit, tension grew like a thread pulled tight. Lena was repairing a panel on the outer ring when she first noticed it. Her suit sensors showed a sudden drop in energy flow. Lights along the structure flickered for a moment. She touched the comm button on her wrist. "Control, I see a disturbance on section 12. Are you reading the same?" The reply came quickly, Myra's voice firm. "Yes, we see it. Hold position. We are rerouting the current." The lights returned, steady again. But Lena's heart kept racing. It had been a small change, yet it felt different from any failure she had seen before. It was not broken wiring. It was something pressing from outside. Later that day, the first tremor came. The workers were inside the central dome, eating together. Tomasz had brought fresh vegetables, Myra carried bread from the planet, and people laughed softly at his simple jokes. Then the dome shook. It was not violent, but it was strange. The walls hummed, the lights dimmed, and the sound of metal bending filled the air. For a moment, silence fell. Every eye looked upward, as if the stars themselves had touched the dome. Commander Ryan stood quickly. His voice carried calm strength. "Stay steady. Systems are holding. This is the storm's first reach. We are prepared." But inside, many hearts were not steady. Lena gripped the edge of the table, her breath quick. She thought of the alien councils, their warnings that walls could not stand against chaos. She wondered if this tremor was proof that they had been right. Still, no one ran. Instead, people began to check systems. Engineers rushed to control panels, pilots checked navigation, workers reported from every section of the ring. It was as if the tremor had woken them from silence. Myra called out over the main channel, "Outer layers are holding, but energy flow is unstable. We need extra hands at section 14. Without hesitation, Lena ran with a group of workers. They reached the section, where sparks danced along the beams. Panels vibrated as if struck by invisible waves. Lena steadied her tools, forcing her hands not to shake. Together, the team rerouted the circuits, tightened the joints, and spoke to each other with short, steady words. "Hold this line. Ready with the clamp. Energy stable now." Slowly the vibration eased. The lights returned to normal. The tremor faded. When they returned to the central dome, Tomasz greeted them with a calm smile, though his eyes showed deep concern. "The storm touched us," he said quietly. "But we did not break." That night, the shelter was filled with quiet talk. Some whispered in fear, others spoke with determination. Doubt still walked among them, but it no longer stood alone. Now there was proof that the shelter could survive the storm's first hand. The next day, more tremors came. Sometimes they lasted only a second, sometimes longer. Each time, the shelter shook like a leaf in wind, yet each time the humans worked together to keep it steady. They fixed circuits, reinforced beams, checked life support, and comforted one another. Alien ships watched from far space. They had not fled entirely, curious to see what humans would do. From their distant view, they expected collapse. But each day they saw the shelter still shining, still growing, even under the tremors. The aliens began to whisper new words. Not only warnings, but also questions. In the hydroponic dome, Tomasz continued planting. The tremors had shaken soil and spilled water, yet he calmly cleaned and replanted. Children from the planet sent him messages of thanks, promising to help when they grew older. His dome became a symbol of peace in the middle of chaos. Lena found herself visiting often. She asked him once, "How do you stay so calm when everything shakes?" Tomasz smiled gently. "When the earth shakes on a farm, you hold the seed tighter. When the storm shakes the shelter, you hold each other tighter. That is all I know." His simple words gave her courage. She began to speak them to younger workers when fear showed in their eyes. Slowly, she learned that strength was not only in fixing wires but in lifting hearts. Myra, meanwhile, worked on new designs. She studied the patterns of the tremors, trying to find rhythm in the chaos. At first, it seemed hopeless, but then she noticed something: the tremors, though strange, were not fully random. They carried waves, peaks, and pauses. With this discovery, she began to adjust the shelter's systems, teaching them to bend with the tremors instead of breaking. When she shared her findings, Commander Ryan praised her. "We cannot stop the storm, but we can learn to move with it. That is wisdom." The workers tested the changes, and soon the shelter no longer shook as before. It swayed gently, like a ship riding waves. The tremors came, but the walls bent and returned, holding firm. The first signs of adaptation had begun. Still, doubt had not vanished. Some workers spoke of leaving, fearing that stronger waves would follow. Others worried the storm would tear the planet apart no matter what the shelter did. These fears were real, but each time they rose, Ryan or Myra or Tomasz reminded them of their purpose. One evening, as the stars bent strangely and the shelter hummed under another tremor, Commander Ryan gathered the crew. His voice was quiet but strong. "You have felt the storm. You have seen its first hand. Yet you still stand, and our shelter still shines. Remember this: storms do not choose who wins or loses. They only show who refuses to fall. We are still here. That is our victory today." The words lifted tired hearts. The crew clapped their hands against the tables, a steady rhythm that echoed through the dome. The first tremor had come. It had shaken walls, lights, and hearts. But instead of breaking, the humans had discovered something new. They could bend, they could adapt, and they could stand again. The storm had touched them, but the shelter remained. And with every tremor, the humans grew stronger in spirit, preparing for the greater waves yet to come. The shelter floated in orbit like a crown of silver light. From the fragile planet below, people looked up and felt comfort seeing its glow. They believed the humans above would protect them. From a distance, alien observers continued to watch, some still certain that the shelter would soon fall. For the humans inside, the days grew harder. The tremors were stronger now, and the storm was moving closer. At first, the tremors had only shaken walls and flickered lights. Now they pressed deeper. The air systems sometimes faltered. The power lines surged with strange pulses. On the outer ring, panels bent under invisible pressure. The shelter groaned like a ship caught in a heavy sea. Yet each time, the crew adapted. They patched circuits, replaced panels, and calmed one another with steady words. Then came the day of the breach. Lena was on duty in the central dome when the alarms began. A sharp sound rang through the halls, and red lights flashed along the walls. Myra's voice came over the channel, urgent and clear. "Section 22, outer layer, has been torn open. All nearby crews move at once." The words cut through the air like a blade. Everyone knew what it meant. The storm had not only shaken the shelter, it had pierced it. Lena joined the rush toward the breach. Workers hurried through corridors, their boots striking the metal floor in unison. Some carried repair kits, others carried energy tools, and all carried fear hidden under firm faces. When they reached section 22, they saw it. A wide crack split across the outer panel. Sparks burst from broken circuits. Air hissed as pressure leaked out, though the inner layers still held. The stars outside glimmered through the broken frame, a silent reminder of the void waiting beyond. For a moment, silence filled the crew. Then Commander Ryan's voice came over the comm, steady as ever. "This is the storm's test. Hold the line. Seal the breach." Myra quickly gave orders. "We need energy redirected. Stabilize the frame. Reroute airflow. Tools ready." Lena joined Tomasz, who was already pulling out heavy clamps. His face was calm but serious. "Hold this beam with me," he said, and together they pressed the clamp against the shaking metal. Sparks burned near their gloves, but they did not let go. The storm outside pushed harder. Strange lights danced along the crack, bending like waves. The shelter's frame shivered under the invisible force. Alarms screamed louder. Yet the crew did not run. They moved as one, voices cutting through the noise. "Pressure is dropping. Clamp in place. Redirect complete. Panel ready to seal." Myra crawled along the frame, welding the edges. Her face was streaked with sweat inside her suit, but her hands did not tremble. She worked with the memory of her grandmother's stone houses guiding her. Each spark from her tool was a promise that the wall would hold. The crack began to close. Slowly, the leak ended. The lights steadied. The alarms faded. The crew breathed out as one. But the storm was not finished. A new surge hit the shelter. Energy waves rippled across the frame, stronger than before. The repaired panel bent again, threatening to tear open. Fear rose like a tide, but then a new voice spoke. It was Myra's apprentice, a young technician named Darren. His idea was simple but strange. "The hydroponic systems," he said quickly. "We can reroute excess energy through the water tanks. The plants can absorb part of the shock." For a moment, others hesitated. Hydroponic systems were not made for this. But Tomasz stepped forward, eyes bright. "Do it. My plants are here to give life. Let them give strength too." With Myra's approval, they rerouted the flow. The surge passed into the water tanks. Lights flickered, and waves spread through the green pools, but the shelter held. The plants bent gently, their roots glowing faintly as they absorbed the extra energy. What had been made for food now became part of the wall. The crew cheered. They had turned weakness into strength. The breach was sealed, the surge absorbed, and the shelter still stood. That night, the central dome was filled with tired faces, yet also with smiles. People spoke of the moment they thought the wall would break, and the way it had held in the end. Tomasz brought food from the hydroponic dome, saying proudly, "These leaves saved us as much as the clamps and welds." Laughter spread, and the sound pushed away the last traces of fear. Still, doubt had not disappeared completely. Lena sat quietly after the meal, staring at the curved glass above where the stars bent in strange patterns. She whispered to Myra, "What if the next breach is worse? What if no patch can hold it?" Myra placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "Then we will find another way. Walls are not meant to be perfect. They are meant to be held by those who care for them. Remember this, Lena, the shelter is not only steel. It is us." Those words stayed with Lena as she returned to her quarters. She thought about the breach, about Tomasz's plans, about Darren's quick idea. She realized that the walls survived not because they were unbreakable, but because people refused to let them fall. From afar, alien ships continued to watch. They had seen the breach, and many expected to see wreckage scatter into space. Instead, they saw the shelter still glowing, its crown of silver unbroken. Messages spread quietly among their councils. Some still spoke of foolishness, but others began to wonder if perhaps humans carried something more than courage. Commander Ryan stood alone on the viewing deck later that night. The stars around him were bent by the storm, their light twisted, yet the shelter remained bright. He whispered to himself, not for others to hear, but as a promise. The walls may break again, but we will stand again. That is the way of humans. The day of the breach became a story shared in every dome. It was remembered not with fear, but with pride. The storm had struck harder than ever before, and for a moment, chaos had entered their walls. Yet humans had answered not with despair, but with ideas, courage, and unity. The fragile shelter had proven it could bend and hold. The storm was still coming, stronger than anything they had yet seen. But now, the people inside the shelter knew this truth: even when the walls broke, they could be rebuilt. And that knowledge gave them strength greater than steel. The shelter had survived the breach. The workers still felt the fear of that moment when the crack opened, but they also carried pride. They had sealed the wound, they had turned hydroponic tanks into shields, and they had proven that humans could hold even when chaos pressed in. Beyond the fragile planet, in the cold reaches of space, alien ships circled. They were not close enough to help, but not far enough to leave. They had remained, curious and doubtful. The councils of their worlds had declared that the humans would fail, yet their captains could not turn away. Now these distant watchers became witnesses. On the ship of the Orel, a tall species with wings folded tight, the crew looked at their screens in silence. They had expected wreckage, but they saw the shelter still glowing. One of them said softly, "They hold still. They mend where we thought no one could mend." On the vessel of the Kale, whose people lived among the storms of gas giants, the crew whispered to one another. "The humans bend like reeds," one said. "They sway but they do not break." And on many other ships, voices rose in wonder. Doubt was still strong, but the seeds of respect had been planted. Inside the shelter, life pressed forward. The breach had taught the crew that no wall was perfect, but that unity could heal any wound. They worked harder now, not because they believed the storm would be easy, but because they had learned that even mistakes could become strength when shared together. Lena found herself walking often through the hydroponic dome. She looked at the green leaves swaying gently under the lights, remembering how they had carried energy when the walls nearly failed. Tomasz was there as always, caring for the plants with patient hands. "Do you think the aliens still doubt us?" Lena asked him one day. Tomasz smiled as he touched a vine curling around its support. "Perhaps they do. But doubt does not matter as much as what we choose to do with our hands. When a neighbor doubts your farm, you do not argue. You only grow your crop, and in time the harvest is your answer." Lena nodded, holding his words in her heart. She realized that the shelter itself was their harvest. Each panel, each dome, each plant was proof of their will. Myra, meanwhile, worked late into the nights. She had begun to design new ways for the shelter to bend with the storm. The breach had shown her that walls could not be too rigid, or they would break. She studied the tremors carefully, finding patterns in the chaos, and built systems that could flow with the waves. When others grew tired, she reminded them, "We are not building a cage of stone. We are weaving a net of light." Her words inspired many. Soon the crew began to see the shelter not as fragile walls, but as a living thing that could breathe and shift. This vision gave them hope, for living things could adapt. The alien witnesses continued to watch. They recorded every tremor, every repair, every adaptation. Some councils sent messages again, warning the humans to leave. But now the messages sounded less certain, as if even the elders who spoke them wondered if their own fear had been too quick. One night, the first direct message came from a Kale captain who could no longer keep silent. His voice reached Commander Ryan across the comms. "Human leader, why do you continue? The storm has no mind, no mercy. Why risk lives when flight is easier? Ryan stood at the viewing deck as he answered. His tone was calm but firm. Because flight gives nothing but distance. We build not only to survive, but to give shelter to those who cannot run. If we hold, others will learn they too can hold. If we fall, then at least we fall with purpose. The Kale captain did not answer at once. Then he said quietly, we will continue to watch. Word of this exchange spread quickly. Among the humans, it gave pride. Among the alien witnesses, it stirred deeper thought. For the first time, some began to speak not of failure, but of possibility. Back inside the shelter, daily life carried on with rhythm. Workers repaired, planted, built, and sang. They ate together in the central dome, their voices filling the air with laughter even as tremors shook the walls. Lena noticed how even the youngest recruits, who once trembled at every alarm, now stood steady when the lights flickered. The shelter had become a place of courage. Tomasz, while tending his plants, began to teach others simple lessons from farming. When a field is dry, you share water. When a crop is weak, you support it with sticks. A shelter is not so different. We must feed it, support it, and care for it as if it were alive. Many laughed, but they also listened, and soon his lessons became a guide for work itself. Myra's systems proved strong when new tremors struck. The walls bent but did not break. Energy flowed where it needed to flow. The shelter seemed to breathe, and those inside felt safer. Each tremor that passed without damage became a victory celebrated with cheers. The alien witnesses, still watching from their ships, grew restless. They had never seen such unity. Their own people often argued, often fled, often saved themselves before saving others. Yet here were humans, holding a fragile ring around a fragile planet, refusing to let go. On the ship of the Orel, an elder finally admitted, perhaps we were wrong. Perhaps walls can be more than stone. Perhaps they can be spirit. The Kale captain reported back to his council. The humans stand. Their walls bend and heal. They are not broken. I think they may endure. Other species began to send small messages of respect. Some even offered supplies. Not many, but enough to show that doubt had begun to turn into quiet admiration. In the shelter, these messages arrived as small lights of hope. Commander Ryan read them aloud to the crew one evening. They watch us, he said, and they see not only walls, but people who hold them. We are no longer alone in this storm. The crew cheered, their voices echoing across the dome. Lena felt pride swell in her chest. The shelter was still fragile, the storm was still coming, but now they carried more than their own hope. They carried the eyes of the galaxy. The day of the breach had been a test. Now the days of the witnesses had begun. Aliens watched, doubted, and slowly learned. The humans continued to build, not for glory, but to show that even in the face of chaos, walls of unity could shine. And so the fragile shelter stood, glowing above the small planet, no longer a hidden project in the dark. It had become a beacon, watched by many, judged by many, but also respected by many. The storm had not yet reached its full strength, but already humanity had given the galaxy something it had not seen before, proof that even the weakest place could be strong when hands and hearts held together. The shelter circled the fragile planet like a shining crown. Its silver walls glowed against the shadow of space, stronger now than when they were first built. Each tremor that had shaken it, each crack that had tested it, had been met with unity and care. And now, as the storm drew closer than ever before, the humans felt a strange new strength rising inside them. The alien witnesses also felt it. Their ships remained on the edge of the system, watching closely. They had seen the breach, they had seen the repairs, and they had seen the humans stand again and again. What began as doubt had slowly become respect. Still, No one was sure if the shelter could survive the storm in its full power. That answer was about to be given. The signs came one evening when the stars bent sharply, as though the whole sky had turned into waves of water. The instruments inside the shelter filled with warnings. Screens flashed, alarms rang, and Myra's calculations showed that the storm itself had reached the edge of the system. Inside the central dome, the crew gathered quickly. Commander Ryan stood at the front, his hands steady on the table. "The storm is here," he said calmly. "From this moment, every choice will matter. Hold your stations. Trust one another. We are the wall." The words were simple, but they lit fire in tired hearts. The crew returned to their posts with renewed strength. The first great wave struck only hours later. The shelter shook harder than ever before. Lights flickered wildly, and corridors rang with the sound of straining metal. The outer panels bent like paper in a storm. For a breath, Lena thought the walls would tear apart completely. But Myra's new systems came alive, guiding the energy into flowing paths. The shelter swayed like a ship, bending but not breaking. "Systems holding," Myra reported, her voice steady though her brow was wet with sweat. "We are riding the wave." Another surge followed, stronger. Sparks lit the air. In the hydroponic dome, water spilled across the floor as the tanks shook under the strain. But once again the shelter absorbed the blow, turning chaos into movement, turning danger into rhythm. Tomasz held fast to the plants, pressing his hands against their frames to keep them upright. When the wave passed, he laughed softly and said, "Even storms cannot uproot life that chooses to grow." His words spread quickly among the workers, reminding them that the shelter itself was like a plant, fragile in appearance, yet strong in roots. Then something unexpected happened. The storm released bursts of energy that should have destroyed circuits, but instead of burning them, the shelter's new systems redirected the power into storage units. The lights grew brighter, the generators hummed stronger, and the humans realized that the storm was giving them strength instead of stealing it. Myra stared at her readings in disbelief. "The energy is feeding us," she said. "The shelter is turning the storm into power." Commander Ryan gave a rare smile. "Then the storm will not break us. It will build us." This discovery changed everything. Where fear had ruled, now excitement grew. The workers began to see the storm not only as danger, but as a gift they could shape. Every surge brought new energy that they used to reinforce the walls, to power new systems, to expand the lights of the shelter. The silver crown above the planet began to shine brighter than ever before. The alien witnesses could not believe their eyes. From their distant ships, they saw the shelter glowing like a beacon. Messages spread across their fleets. On the ship of the Orel, one captain whispered, "They have turned chaos into strength. No other people we know have done this." On the vessel of the Kale, a scientist said, "The storm bends them, but they bend the storm in return. They are not resisting. They are dancing with it." Other species, once certain of failure, now began to speak of hope. The humans had reached a turning point, and the galaxy saw it. Inside the shelter, the crew worked with renewed spirit. Lena felt the change most of all. She no longer trembled when alarms sounded. Instead, she moved with purpose, guiding repairs and calming younger workers. She remembered Tamash's lessons about farming, Myra's vision of weaving a net of light, and Ryan's steady voice. She saw how each person gave a piece of strength, and how together those pieces became something unbreakable. During one heavy surge, a new breach almost opened in Section 9. Lena rushed there with the team. The metal bent inward, glowing with heat from the storm's touch. But before it could tear, the energy redirected, flowing into the hydroponic tanks and storage units. The panel straightened again, whole and shining. When the team returned to the dome, Lena spoke loudly, so all could hear. "We are not breaking anymore. We are growing." Her words spread across the shelter like fire, giving courage to every worker. As the storm continued, the shelter grew brighter. What had once looked fragile now looked alive, almost like a star in orbit of the small planet. Children on the planet below pointed at the sky with joy. "The crown is glowing," they said. "The humans have lit the heavens." The alien witnesses also saw this glow. Some began sending respectful messages, offering help. A few ships even moved closer, not to flee, but to learn. The humans welcomed them, sharing knowledge freely. "This shelter is not ours alone," Commander Ryan told them. "It is proof of what is possible when walls are built with hope." The turning point had arrived. The storm had meant to crush them, but instead it had revealed their strength. The fragile shelter, once doubted by all, had become a beacon of light in chaos. It was no longer only a wall against destruction. It had become a symbol of what life could create even in the darkest of skies. That night, as the storm continued to press, the crew gathered again in the central dome. They were tired, but their faces shone with pride. Tomasz served food from the hydroponic dome, Myra shared her newest ideas, and Lena laughed with young workers who now carried courage in their eyes. Commander Ryan watched them quietly, knowing that the shelter had become more than steel and light. It had become a living promise. The galaxy had doubted. The storm had tested. But humanity had found its turning point. And now, instead of breaking, the shelter stood stronger with every wave, shining brighter with every surge, a crown of hope above a fragile world. The storm did not vanish in a day. It rolled across the fragile planet for many long weeks. Waves of pressure shook the air, strange lights filled the skies, and the shelter above was tested again and again. But now the shelter did not tremble with fear. It bent, it shifted, and it grew stronger with every passing surge. Where once alarms had filled the crew with dread, now those same alarms became signals of action. Workers moved swiftly, systems redirected power, and the walls glowed brighter. Every test became proof that humanity had not only survived but had learned to thrive within the storm. Aliens who had once only watched from far away began to move closer. Their ships drifted nearer to the orbiting shelter, shining like distant lanterns. They came not with warnings, but with questions. They wanted to understand how fragile walls could turn into living strength. One day, a council ship from the Kale requested permission to dock. The humans opened their doors gladly. When the Kale delegation stepped into the central dome, they paused in wonder. They had expected fear and weakness, but they saw laughter, singing, and glowing walls filled with energy. They saw humans moving with calm strength, repairing, planting, and guiding one another like the parts of a single great heart. The Kale leader spoke softly. "We told ourselves you would break. Yet here you are, brighter than we imagined." Commander Ryan welcomed them with a nod. "We did not build to prove anyone wrong. We built to stand together. And in standing, we found more than we expected." The Kale delegation spent many days learning from Myra, Tomasz, Lena, and others. They studied the systems that bent with the storm, the hydroponics that doubled as shields, and the ways energy flowed like rivers through the shelter. But what impressed them most was not the machines. It was the unity. Tomasz explained it best one evening when asked how such fragile people could endure. He touched the soil of a growing vine and said, "A single root is weak. Many roots together hold a tree through wind and rain. We are like roots. Alone we are small, but together we hold fast." These words spread quickly among the visitors, and soon other species sent delegates as well. The shelter became more than a wall. It became a place of meeting, a place where different voices shared ideas, where doubts melted into respect. Down on the fragile planet, children looked up at the shining crown each night. They grew up believing that storms could be met, not with fear, but with courage and care. Their teachers told them stories of the first breach, the first repair, and the first wave turned into light. These stories became lessons for life itself. Myra, who once worked through endless nights alone, now found herself guiding alien engineers. She showed them how to design systems that bent instead of broke, how to weave strength like a net. Her vision had grown beyond the shelter, reaching into ships, cities, and even the dreams of entire worlds. Lena, once a young worker filled with doubt, had become a leader in her own right. She trained others, always reminding them that mistakes could be healed, that even cracks could teach new ways to build. Her calm voice became a comfort during hard moments, and her courage inspired the next generation. Tomasz continued his quiet work with the plants. Yet his simple lessons became famous across the stars. Care for life as if it is your own strength, he would say, and it will carry you through storms. Many who came to learn carried his words back to their worlds. As for Commander Ryan, he remained steady, guiding without seeking praise. When visitors asked how he had kept the crew united, he only answered, "I trusted them." That was enough. The storm slowly began to pass. Its waves grew weaker, its strange lights faded, and the skies cleared once more. The fragile planet, once thought too weak to protect, now rested under a shining crown that had not only endured but transformed into a beacon of light for the galaxy. When the last surge finally drifted away into the dark of space, the crew gathered in the central dome. For a long moment they stood in silence, each remembering the journey. Then cheers filled the air, rising louder and louder until the dome shook with joy. They had not only survived. They had changed what survival meant. Messages poured in from distant worlds. Some called the shelter the crown of hope. Others named it the wall that bends. Many simply called it the light. Whatever the name, it had become a legacy greater than anyone expected. The alien witnesses, now no longer only witnesses but partners, began to build their own shelters using what they had learned. Yet each one carried a reminder that it was humans who first chose to stand when all others doubted. Generations later, the fragile shelter was still remembered. Not because it was perfect, but because it showed that imperfection itself could be turned into strength. Its walls still circled the small planet, glowing softly. Children still pointed at it from below, and travelers from across the stars still visited it to see where the turning point began. It was said that the shelter was fragile only in name. In truth, it was strong because it had been built with unity, care, and hope. And long after the storm had passed, that legacy continued to shine, teaching all who came near that even the weakest walls could hold when hearts held them too. Thus, the fragile shelter became eternal, a symbol not of fear, but of humanity's choice to stand, to mend, and to light the darkness with courage. And the galaxy never forgot the lesson it gave.